Joe, if you don't mind sharing your reflections.
Certainly. Well, based on my background, again, as Betsy mentioned, I teach. Since my retirement from the Marine Corps, at least, I've been teaching for about the past 9 years or so. And a big part of what I teach, leadership and ethics specifically, is providing to students, whether it be undergrads in the form of midshipmen at the Naval Academy or the graduate students, I have the incoming company officers. I like to provide some historical context, I suppose. And I'll try to do the same. I know Bruce did quite a bit of that, providing background historical context. But I'd like to talk specifically what is kind of a setup, I suppose, in terms of leader development in the years and the decades, in fact, prior to September 11th. Now, in the days following the planned successful attack on the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's reported to have said that I fear that all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant. Now, whether he actually said that or not is really in dispute. That the surprise attack itself on Pearl Harbor actually awakened, in fact, a sleeping giant is beyond dispute. The U.S. rapidly built a conventional force with an unprecedented mobilization of economic, military, and political power. This power remained more or less unchanged for 60 years. This huge conventional force served us very well through the Cold War, but proved to have limitations where surgical precision was required. Examples of this abound in the Vietnam War experience, certainly in things like Operation Eagle Claw, which was the failed attempt to rescue the hostages in April of 1980. The truth is, the shock action of Pearl Harbor put the U.S. military, and in particular, leader development within the U.S. military, on a very specific path. That path is characterized by large, industrial, conventional methods and philosophies. It put us in great standing vis-a-vis other conventional powers, such as the Soviet Union. But it put us in pretty poor standing vis-a-vis the so-called asymmetric threats of non-state actors, transnational terrorism, and unconventional warfare. This fact remained unchanged beyond the end of the Cold War, the point at which the U.S. lost its need for a one-dimensional conventional force. It was the shock action, I argue, of September 11th, 2001 that sent the U.S. military, and in particular its leader development philosophy, on an entirely different trajectory. Now, today's leader development programs, as the former Chief of Staff of the United States Army had once said, are patterned more on the Lewis and Clark model than on the Patton and Eisenhower model. In other words, expeditionary leadership, as we might refer to it today, competencies such as adaptability, creativity, intuition, and cross-cultural savvy have eclipsed traditional competencies associated with managing static bureaucracies. To accomplish effective leadership development in the post-9/11 reality, we have all come to realize that even traditional methods of classroom instruction or pedagogy have to change. Experiential leadership development, I think of which you're going to speak to in good detail, has grown in favor across the military and in fact across the entire field of leader education. This approach involves preparing instructors who are masters of their trade and confident facilitators, facilitators being intentionally chosen, since a portion of my role at the Academy is to prepare junior faculty for their role. It involves preparing students who are intrinsically motivated to learn. And it involves settings that incorporate something that some of you may be familiar with. It's a concept that dates back to John Dewey, to the earlier parts of the 20th century, a cycle of experiential learning that involves conceptualization, that is to say thinking or classroom work, experimentation on that thought, concrete experiences that back up and reinforce that learning, and reflection, probably the most often ignored portion of this learning model, I suppose. Fortunately, I think at this point, we all realize in the various settings that most of us lead, and in my case teach, that we have some exceptional, intrinsically motivated students. And as Time Magazine called them on the August 29th cover story from just a week or two ago, the new greatest generation. I must say that I agree with that assessment about this generation that is currently prosecuting. Leader development in the military and across academia is catching up, I think, in many ways with our students and offering a better, more adaptive alternative to the conventional model. Finally, and this is something I hope we get to in the discussion portion, I believe there's a renewed emphasis on the moral domain of leadership. And it's evident in military schools. It certainly was the case in my role as director of the Lejeune Leadership Institute at Marine Corps University. In fact, it became the bulk of my role in that particular world, trying to figure out the ethical underpinnings of preparing warriors for the fight. But it's also the case, this moral domain of leadership, I believe, in public universities, colleges across the entire nation. And that, in fact, can also be attributable to the watershed events that were September 11th. Now, December 7th, 1941, awakened that sleeping giant, as I began with. I believe September 11th, 2001, made that giant a lean, thinking warrior capable of far more subtle effect.